And yeah, just thank you again for coming, and please give a warm Marlboro welcome to Thomas More.
Thank you very much. I feel like I don't have to say anything now. That was No, it's wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it immensely. Well, I came across a story today that I heard many years ago, and I thought I'd start out with it tonight. You probably have heard of it. There was a small plane with just a few passengers on it, a single-engine plane flying through the air. There was, among the passengers were a monk, a college professor, and a laid-back college student. And suddenly the engine stopped running, and the pilot said, "We're going to have to jump. Unfortunately, we only have 3 parachutes." He said, "Well, since I'm the pilot, I'm going to take one," and he jumped out. And then the college professor said, "Well, I'm one of the smartest people in the world, so the world needs me. So I'm going to take one." And he jumped up. The monk was kind of worried. He said, "Well, I'm a monk. I should probably give my parachute to this college student here." And the college student said, "Oh, relax, take it easy. The smartest man in the world just jumped out with my backpack." So there is within me a certain, I collect stories like that. There's within me a certain anti-intellectualism of some kind. I've been trying to sort out all my life. What wasn't told in the introduction was that I have been fired from university positions more than once, which is an interesting position to be in. So I have a mixed relationship to the academic world and to the intellectual life, but I love those stories where the professors get it in the end. So, but that will come clear as I go on and talk to you tonight. I think the best way for me to start with you on the theme, I want to talk about both a liberal and a liberating education, is to just rehearse, go over again, just the basics of what I do. I didn't plan on doing this, writing about the soul in my life. And when I was a kid, I never said, when I grow up, I'm going to write books about the soul. It just wasn't that kind of a thing. It's just a calling. It's one of those things that happens. And I end up writing books, and every one of them says something about the soul. And I'm still at it. I'm just finishing a book now on the soul of medicine. So I'd like to just tell you briefly what all that is about. It's interesting to me that today the word soul is used, it's used in a different way than it has in the past, but it's a very old idea. People used to gather and just talk about what the soul is and how to take care of your soul. The Platonists used to do that. Platonists throughout history have met on November 7th. Remember that date for next year. You meet on November 7th, which is Plato's birthday, to gather some friends together, and each person is supposed to stand up and say what they think love and the soul are all about. It's a wonderful kind of celebration to have. And they also say that whenever people gather to talk about the soul, like we are doing tonight, that we are recreating the Platonic Academy, the group of people that Plato gathered to talk about the soul. And during the Italian Renaissance, people did the same thing. They would meet, they would have some food, and friends would come together, and each person would stand up one after the other and say, this is what love is, this is what the soul is. So what we're doing tonight is a deep archetypal event. It's not what it appears to be. There's something very special about this. It's been going on for centuries and centuries. People gathered like we are. We could be doing other things. It's not exactly the most beautiful Vermont night ever. And yet we come here to talk about the soul. So that's an extraordinary thing. People use the word in different ways. I use the word based on the traditions of the soul. And one of the earliest statements we have in our Western culture about the soul goes back to Heraclitus, who was an early Greek philosopher, who, interestingly, was called the Obscure. He's been my hero for a long time. I aim for obscurity whenever I can find it. I'm not a person who tries to be terribly clear, because I think clarity sometimes misses some of the subtleties. So, what is the soul? Heraclitus said this. These are his words. We have them exactly from way back in his time. He said that you could never discover the limits of the soul, no matter how many roads you took. So deep is its mystery. Those are his exact words. You could never discover the limits of the soul. That's your soul, or soul in general. You can never discover the limits of the soul, no matter how many roads you took, Jungian, Freudian, philosophical, psychological, no matter how many roads you took. So deep is its mystery. And the word he uses for deep is bathos. Now, maybe you know that these research submarines are sometimes called bathyspheres. Bathos, the same word. So imagine that, going deep into the ocean. That's the image here. You could never discover the limits of your soul. So deep is its mystery. And the word I'm translating as mystery is logos. It's one of those power words from long ago that can mean a lot of different things. I think the best translation is mystery. So think about that for yourself as I'm talking here. What is the soul? What is my soul? If someone says, tell me something about your soul, you can just quote Heraclitus. I could never discover the limits of my soul. No matter how many roads I took, so deep is my mystery. And that has been the basis of all my work, really. That's why I use the word mystery in so many of my books. I use it about marriages in my book Soulmates. I always have been arguing, that since I think mystery is such an important thing, I have spoken against such ideas as communicating in marriage. It's always seemed to me that communicating doesn't make too much sense. You know, trying to get people to communicate. Marriage is this profound mystery. You can imagine. People come together out of their families that are so complicated and, at least half psychotic. I mean, it's really complicated families. We come together and we bring these two worlds together, and people don't have a clue who they are. They have no idea how vast each person is. You try to communicate across that divide, I don't think it can be done too well. So I just thought, let's not try that one. Let's not try to communicate. Let's do something else. Let's be together, let's have some life together, but let's not worry about communicating quite so much. I've also suggested maybe compatibility is not the most important thing. Because, just think of it, we are so individual. Any kind of compatibility we would have would be so slight compared to the full mystery of who we are. So I've applied these ideas in anything I've touched, anything I've written about, all these books, including this latest one on medicine and illness. It's a great mystery. And the doctors hate to hear that when I say that to them. I speak to doctors quite often, medical doctors. And they tell me, we know everything. Like the guy jumping out of the plane. That's why I like that story. They tell me we're going to know everything about medicine in 10 years. That's what they tell me, literally. And I say it's a mystery. Illness is still a mystery. The human being is still very, very mysterious. That's what the soul is. We have souls. We can't fathom who we are, and we could live from that place. Now, the problem in education, I think, has been that we have been caught up in a particular mythology for the past, I don't know how many years, maybe 300 or 400 years, maybe more, maybe less. Certainly the 20th century was the pinnacle of it. And I guess we could call it the mythology of modernism. We're modern people. And the 20th century was a time of great achievement for the modernist myth. So we now have iPods, thanks to the modernist myth. We have terrific computers. We can fly around the world quite easily, and all of that is absolutely terrific and wonderful. I wouldn't give any of it up. But the myth of modernism, especially in the 20th century, did not give us world peace, did it? Did it help marriages do better? Are marriages going better than they used to be? No. How about taking care of children? No. Not if you look at the statistics, and we know. What about the safety of our streets and our homes? Just read the news for the past 3 days. See how many people have been slaughtered by crazy people. Just in ordinary places, Binghamton, New York, the latest, maybe. So, modernism gave us a lot, but it did not help us at the human level terribly. And interestingly, there's no place in modernist philosophy and mythology for the human soul. There's no place for it. It doesn't fit. And I also think that in modern mythology, there's very little place for the arts, which is interesting. Not a real place for it. Not like if you go to a culture where it is not within the modernist vein, the arts are in the very center of life, and they're connected to religion and the spiritual life. So it seems to me that if we want to have a really liberal education, that doesn't mean political liberalism. It originally meant having the freedom to think and to study and to talk about ideas, that kind of a liberal education. We're free. We're free to do those things, to study what's important, to go deep into ourselves. I think we have to get out of the modernist myth. I hope that modernism is over. Now, I know a lot of people call it postmodernism because we don't know what comes. We just call it after-modernism. That's all we can do at this point. But I think that that's really where we are. And we have to watch out because that modernist myth is still very strong. In fact, American cultural life in general lives by it. The news, the language of the news, wherever you get your news, is modernist generally. There's no place for the soul there. It's as though human beings don't have a soul. They don't have a mysterious depth. Our emotional life is shallow, so we can engineer our behavior, engineer our lives. Even there are psychologies, psychological approaches that are really about managing a life. It's almost, and in medicine as well, it's like you go to the hospital and it's like bringing your body in to be fixed, isn't it? Hospitals, and I've been spending a lot of time in hospitals. They're incredibly modernist places to be in. And the people are very proud of their modern myth there in those hospitals. Very proud of them. I can understand the pride because a lot has been accomplished. But there's no human soul. There's no, you rush a body into the hospital and you fix it up and patch it up. Just recently I noticed an interview when the actress who just died, skiing accident. Yes. They interviewed the brain surgeon and they said, how can you operate on somebody with a family around? How can you do the surgery? He says, I just forget that she's a person. I just close that off. I'm operating on a brain. And I just do my job, and later I talk to the family. And that sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? But that worries me, that we can treat each other, even if we're doing surgery, treat each other as these bodies, as these, almost like automobiles coming in for repair. Paracelsus, the great physician of the 16th century, who was not a modernist, said that if a physician wants to take a urine sample, he should know astrology. Can you imagine that? He should know astrology. He should know what's going on in the sky. Is the moon right for it? Can you imagine going into a pharmacy today, CVS or whatever you have here? Go into the pharmacy and say, do you think the moon is okay for me to get this prescription today? We don't think that way at all. We don't think, that the world has anything to do because we've abstracted everything down. So we've lost the soul of things. We've lost the soul in medicine, the soul of our illness, the soul of our relationships. And then we wonder why people are going nuts and crazy and shooting their families. Why are they doing it? I would say from loss of soul. In general, that's the general problem, loss of soul. If you have a soul, you can feel for another person. You have that depth. You have that depth of feeling. You're a person who has depth. You have the depth of your family behind you and your family ideals and your values. And you've thought about things, and you have the depth of your spirituality. Anyway, so there have been in this modern world, modernism has given us a lot, but it hasn't given us enough, so it's time to move on. Let's hope the 21st century can move to another myth, a different mythology of what we're all about. And in education, I think we have a lot of guides for that. In education, what it can mean is moving away from seeing education as training to get a job and to make money. That's absolutely essential, and it's an important consideration. I don't want to say it's not, but it's not the whole story. It's not the whole story. And if you read the older philosophers and physicians of the past, what they say is that what you need is this sort of big nest of soul, of the soul values, human values, broad vision, and within that you can put the training fantasy if you want. I'm out to make money and I have to be trained and get skills. Those are important things, but they fit within a larger context. The Greeks called that kind of education paideia. Paideia is what they referred to it. And for them, paideia had two goals. One was the development of a person's own individual, what they call arete, which is kind of the coming together of your talents and your personality and your family background, all of that coming to a point and a pitch in you and in your creativity. That's the arete. And the second part of it, the education paideia, was to create citizens, members of community, to create people who can be in community, who know how to be in community, whether it's the community of a marriage or a family or a city or a nation or a world community. Imagine if our education were aimed that way. Maybe it is here. But imagine if that were our educational idea, our vision, that we create these individuals whose creativity just sparkles and shines and comes to a point. In their own individuality, that's what arete is, the individuality, not like anybody else. And secondly, that they are people who are able to be in community, in all these different forms of community, and be citizens and contribute. Sounds like a pretty good goal to me. That's I would call it the soul of education. I think there are two other areas of education, this kind of education, I particularly am interested in. One of them comes from my identity, the hat I wear as a psychotherapist. I see people doing crazy things in this world, all around us, of course, but really outrageous things, like recently a man in Washington State killing children and his family out of jealousy, not being able to handle his wife going off with someone else, even though they had separated. Well, those of us who are therapists see that story all the time. It's a very, very common story that you see in therapy. And what does it show us? All of this acting out of jealousy all around us. To me, it shows that we have not found ways to educate ourselves, and especially our younger people, psychologically. It's no big deal to learn how to deal with jealousy. I mean, it really isn't. It's a powerful emotion, but just a few good ideas, a little bit of practice, and it's not so bad. You can deal with it. But people go crazy. Every community, I'm sure, throughout Vermont, people are killing each other out of jealousy, hurting each other, domestic violence from jealousy. Why don't we have a sort of jealousy czar somewhere? Why haven't we paid attention to this? Or why don't we educate people, our people, in how to deal with these difficult emotions? I would think that's part of education as well. It's not all that difficult to do. There are just a few things you have to know about, and maybe talk about a bit and apply to yourself, and you've got it licked. It's not so complicated. But we don't teach these things, we teach facts, and I think we're shy of maybe touching the soul. We're shy of that, bringing the soul into education. It's difficult in some ways. I think we're shy of it, therefore we don't get trained in this. There's a related experience of mine. One time I lived in a place where there was a spiritual community down the road from me. And they were very, very intelligent people. And I would go over to them sometimes for their events and for rituals. And I was amazed. They had a wonderful library. You'd have a conversation with them about theologies of different religions, and they were so sharp and they knew it all. And over time, a bunch of them from that community wanted to come to me for therapy. And I couldn't believe the mess in these people's lives. In other words, their intellect or their spiritual life was at this high level, extremely high level of sophistication. Their emotional lives are a mess, and especially their sexuality, a total mess. I've never seen anything like it. Absolutely, had no idea what they were doing. No way of making a decision sexually at all. Total mess. And all kinds of unwanted pregnancies and diseases as well. Everything that went with it. It was amazing. I sort of took a lesson from that. That I think in some ways that's the way our culture works. We educate often at this level of fact or intellect, but we don't know how to educate for the soul very well. Psychologically. We don't know how to do that education too well. Now that could be done. I know from having taught at the university that a lot of university professors don't like that. I keep thinking back to the guy leaping out of the book. They don't like that. It's too messy maybe, it's too soft. Getting it down into the soul is difficult. I remember when I was teaching at Southern Methodist University, which was one of those places that fired me. I was teaching there, and my friend James Hillman was living in the same city in Dallas, and he and I used to go out to Mexican restaurants quite often and talk over things. And he said to me once, he said, you are advocating the soul at this university. They're going to do you in. The soul loses. You're not going to make it. Plan on it, he said. You're not going to get through the number of years you expect to be there. He was kind of making a little prophecy that came true. So I think it takes a different vision to be able to address the needs of the soul in education. But if we don't do that, I don't know how we're going to survive. Because soullessness, or loss of soul, or confusion of soul, is responsible for so much of our violence, whether it's international violence. I mean, just think of what goes on internationally. There's absolutely no psychological and emotional sophistication about that, is there? Listen to the politicians talk. If people talk to each other that way, we'd all be shooting each other all the time. So we have a lot of work to do to educate ourselves in how to deal with the soul issues so that we don't act them out all the time. Psychology has taught us some things, a few key things. For me, one of the most important things psychology has taught is that we are made up, our psyche is made up of what the psychologists call complexes. And a complex is just it's a group of feelings and thoughts and memories all focused around one theme. Like an inferiority complex, which people talk about. You know what that's like? If you meet somebody who has an inferiority complex, they just feel bad about themselves no matter what, and you see them doing wonderful things, and you try to tell them, you know, you're really doing fine. It doesn't do any good. It doesn't touch the complex. Because the complex is so deep and so, what Jung called autonomous. It has its own will, and it's so much power. That's the complex. I remember one client I had years ago who came to me. She was 30 years old. She had appeared in, by that time, I think she appeared in something like 25 Hollywood movies. She had been nominated for one Oscar and won several awards. She had 5 children. And she came to me and said she wanted to come into therapy because she said her life is going by and she's done nothing. She hasn't accomplished anything in her life. Now, most people would say she'd accomplished a fair amount. But her complex, it had nothing to do with reason and with the facts. Her complex, which bothered her and just drove her crazy, was this theme in her life that dominated her life. I am not amounting to anything. I'm not doing anything worthwhile. That was her complex. Now, we all have these complexes. I would like to see in our education an opportunity to deal with those things. I don't mean everyone being in therapy. It doesn't take that. It takes a particular kind of general sophistication about psychological matters. And somehow we have to get, I think we have to get that into our education, or everything else is not going to be worth it because we're going to shoot each other, kill each other off. And that goes right along, the complexes are very related to general unconsciousness, not being aware of what's going on, what motivates us. Now, one way there are lots of ways to deal with these things. One is certainly psychotherapy. So it's important to have a vibrant psychotherapy program connected to the educational part of a college or a university. I think it's very important, and I find as I travel that many of the therapy and counseling departments are very, very important. They are a very important focus of life on a campus. The soul life of a campus is often there. But they're often isolated too, and there are other ways this can be done. One of the things that has frustrated me, in my books, most of my books, I often refer to mythology. Well, one myth or another. Since I know the Greek language a bit, I use Greek mythology because I can be very specific about the language. So I use mainly Greek mythology. And I can tell you, I've traveled this country so many times talking about the books. And people come up to me and say, you know, I studied mythology in school and I never knew that it had anything to do with me. They're surprised that myth has anything to do with their own life. It's very interesting because that's what mythology is all about. And my point is that we could teach mythology, we could teach literature, we could teach all of this in a way that addresses our complexes and our unconsciousness. It could perform a therapeutic role. In other words, this could be so easily misunderstood. I'm not trying to say let's do therapy in the classroom, but that teaching, and this is very much in the spirit of Plato, teaching and education partner with therapeutics. They partner with therapeutics. And if we don't have the therapeutic element in education, I would say the soul is not there, and therefore our education is incomplete. Okay, just one more point. The other hat that I wear is, I have a PhD in religious studies. I consider myself a theologian more than anything else, but a different kind of theologian from the theologians in the past. Theologians of the past often explain their own religious tradition. I prefer to see the theologian today as someone who speaks for the invisible and the mysterious in our lives, our social lives and our personal lives. The theologian speaks to those mysterious, ultimately mysterious, the ultimate issues in everyone's life, questions of meaning, of value, what's valuable, what's ethical, of how you're going to deal with your mortality, how do you imagine yourself dying, what is all that about, afterlife, all those questions. A theologian, that's his job, that's her job, to deal with those questions. And so I would also think that a liberating education would be one in which we get out of the secularism of the modernist myth and somehow reinstate, in a new way, reinstate theology, reinstate the spiritual issues, focus also on the spirituality of the student. And this, it doesn't have to threaten our principle of separating church and state, because we're talking here about the spirituality of the person. We've given up. We've left the divisions of the religions for the 20th century. That was a 20th century idea, to have them all in competition and only be able to follow one. Let's now see that our spirituality can be rich from all the traditions of the world. You can certainly follow your own tradition and make it richer. I wrote a magazine article a few years ago about myself called Zen Catholic. And I didn't mean that in a superficial way. Zen Buddhism has done a huge amount for my Catholicism. It's in no way a conflict. If anything, I'm more of a Catholic today than I ever was. I mean, the Pope would not agree with me. But I am, in my own estimation, in my own view, I'm more of a Catholic today than I ever was, even when I was a monk. Partly because I've been so influenced by Zen Buddhism and Sufism and Greek spirituality. So I think it opens up, it's a great liberating thing to open up the possibility that we are people, who the traditions say we are made up of body, soul, and spirit. Not mind, body, spirit. Body, soul, and spirit. And that's where education could be, educating in all three of those areas. So I'd like to finish by reading a couple poems to you about this. You like poetry here, I hear. Is that right? Good. Okay, I have some poets, some of my favorite poets. So I have to tell you a story first, so I'll get to the poem. A little story. A student was in a library trying to get his computer to work. And he's turning it on, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off. And there happens to be a Zen teacher nearby. The Zen teacher goes over to him and says, "Don't you know you can't get that computer to work by just turning it on, turning it off, and turning it on, turning it off? You have to know what the problem is." So the student says, "Okay, what should I do?" He said, "Turn it on, turn it off." So he turned the thing on, turned it off, and it started working. That's it. Fellow went into the library and said, "I'm looking for the power of now." Librarian said, "It's on order." Those weren't poems, those are something else. Okay, listen to this. I said that we can develop our spirituality. We could see our work as students and teachers as theology today in a new way, a free way, free of all the old competitive ideas, free of all the worries and anxieties about what you should be and do, free of all of that. The joy of theology. There's a title for a new book. The joy of theology. And part of that joy is to discover how much there is in this world that people have learned about the spiritual life. That we can now, today, we have this great opportunity that people in the past haven't had as much to draw from. Today you can go to the library, go online, and you can find, within seconds, you can get some of the greatest spiritual literature of the world, right? And the best translations right in front of you. So people say to me, well, give me an example. What kind of spiritual thing are you talking about that would help you? Okay, here's a little piece from the Tao Te Ching, which is, to me, one of the most remarkable, simple collections of spiritual teachings in the world. And I read it myself. I tell myself to read it once a year. There are certain things I do once a year. One of them is to read the Tao Te Ching. I actually read it a lot more than that, but all the way through once a year as a kind of practice. The other thing I do is during Holy Week, which is this week, I will listen to the Bach St. Matthew Passion on Friday. That's another one of my practices. But you can have your own. In India you'd call it puja, right? You have your own ritual that you can base on your tradition, but make your own and use your own creativity and have the satisfaction of creating your own spiritual life and practice. And no one else has to do it the way you do. And yet you're honoring the traditions, and I'm still, as I say, I'm more of a Catholic than I ever was. So here's from the Tao Te Ching. Yield and overcome. Bend and be straight. Empty and be full. Wear out and be new. Have little and gain. Have much and be confused. Now that's a good meditation for a long time there. Yield and overcome. This has been my practice. I've been homeschooling my daughter for the past 3 years. She's 17 now. That's been my whole practice. It's been yield and overcome. I yield to everything. She says, I don't want to do that. Fine. I'd rather study this. Okay, let's do that. I yield and I have overcome. I'm telling you. She is coming out of that an educated person. And she has, and I have yielded. We've had this dance back and forth, and she's learned to yield. Here's one of my favorite passages from spiritual literature, from the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. At night, in my bed, I longed for my only love. I sought him, but did not find him. This is from the Bible. At night in my bed, I longed for my only love. I sought him, but did not find him. That's kept me meditating for many years. In bed, is that a dream? Is it the bed of love? Is it sleep? Is it my home? What is it? In bed, I long for my only love. I sought him but did not find him. There's something in all the spiritual literature about not finding what it is we're looking for. It's waiting for Godot. We find it in literature. In Samuel Beckett, who I consider one of the great spiritual writers of all time. Waiting for Godot. We're all waiting and we're not really sure. Now here's one from a woman who committed suicide, who was a great poet. Actually, she started out as a housewife in the suburb of Boston, and saw that they were offering a course in poetry at the community college nearby, and she took the course and became one of America's greatest poets, Anne Sexton. And she committed suicide. She would often spend weeks at McLean Hospital outside Boston, and she tells how she would get poetry readings and then rush over to the hospital. She couldn't stand the tension of giving the readings. Here's what she wrote: many theological poems, and here's one of them. I went to the bird with the human head and asked, "Please, sir, where is God? God is too busy to be here on earth. His angels are like 1,000 geese assembled and always flapping. But I can tell you where the well of God is." "Is it on earth?" I asked. He replied, "Yes. It was dragged down from paradise by one of the geese." I walked many days past witches that eat grandmothers, knitting booties as if they were collecting a debt. Then, in the middle of the desert, I found the well. It bubbled up and down like a litter of cats, and there was water, and I drank, and there was water, and I drank. Then the well spoke to me. It said, "Abundance is scooped from abundance, yet abundance remains." Then I knew. This poem is called What the Bird with the Human Head Knew. If that isn't theology, I don't know what is. I have not too much of an idea what it means, but that's not important. It's a chant. Okay, another theological poem from one of the great theological poets, D.H. Lawrence. He has a great many poems about gods. Here's one. I refuse to name the gods because they have no name. I refuse to describe the gods because they have no form, nor shape, or substance. Ah, but the simple ask for images. Then for a time at least they must do without. But all the time I see the gods. The man who is moving the tall white corn. Suddenly it curves as it yields, the white wheat, and sinks down with a swift rustle and a strange falling flatness. Ah, the gods, the swaying body of God. Ah, the fall stillness of God, autumnus, and it is only July, the pale gold flesh of Priapus falling asleep. It's interesting how the poets keep our theology, our theological passions and sensitivities alive in a time of soullessness, of a secularist culture that we've had for the past over 100 years. The poets have kept the theology alive in ways that the churches, I think, have not. The churches have generally, if I may say so, emphasized their doctrine and their teaching and their morals. The poets have maintained a sensitivity to the divine in life. And you have to choose, I guess, which is more important. But the poets have maintained it. Think of all these poets. I could come up here with a list that would keep us going all night of poems about how to find God, how to find the gods. When I was studying for my PhD in religion, one of the focuses of my studies was religion and literature, the relation between religion and literature. And we had many literature students coming to the religion department to study literature, because we were not just studying the formal and technical aspects of literature and the history. We were looking for the gods. We were looking for the divine in the poetry. And not in any naive, simplistic notion of what religion is, but in a very sophisticated, I think, intelligent way of understanding what religion is. Okay, I'm going to keep going. You can stay. No, just a couple more. This one is by someone I know who actually helped me do the editing on Care of the Soul many years ago, Jane Hirschfield. But perhaps the heart does not want to be understood. Your shadow falls on its pond and the small fish hurry away. They have their own lives, not yours, which they love. And if to you it is anger, bewilderment, grief, to them it is simply life. Their mouths open and close. Their gills, they are fed, they breathe. The gods are not large outside us. They are the fish going on with their own concerns. So that's a view of gods, the gods, and of theology. See what we can do. You can accomplish a great deal with this kind of thing that I'm presenting to you here. You accomplish a study of literature in these poems. You accomplish a study of theology. You become you become enriched by the creative talent of the artist writing the poetry. And you find resources that are of great importance for your own spiritual life. All at the same time. You see what I'm suggesting for what I would see as a liberal education? It's not just bringing the arts more prominently into focus. It is seeing that the arts are not just about a kind of entertainment or self-expression. It's the arts that maintain this profound connection to the very source of our lives. And when I say that, I'm not talking about belief. I'm just talking about the very basis, the deepest, most place of your life. That is what the arts can do for us. Poetry does it, music can do it, architecture can do it. The Renaissance, by the way, this is very, very in the spirit, much in the spirit of Renaissance art. This is all I take from Renaissance teachers. One of my greatest influences was Marsilio Ficino, who lived in Italy in the 15th century, who wrote about these things. He tried to present this kind of an education. He was a priest who believed very strongly in Greek spirituality. So, to summarize, the secularism of our contemporary culture is an aspect of its soullessness. The fact that we have trouble with soul shown in our acting out, all the murderousness, all the prejudices, even the economic problems we have from greed, all come from soullessness. The inability to be in community and to be able to foster yourself and community at the same time. And what can we do about that? The only thing we can do is educate souls and not just stuff information into brains. That's the only way I see that we can do it, the only way. But that does mean a different vision for what it means to learn and to teach. It's a very different thing. I think I'd like to tell one more story. I think those of you probably, I know some of you here can tell much better than I, but I'll try. Story of Sufi. Tell me how to say Nasruddin?
Nasruddin, yeah.
Nasruddin was with a group of friends talking about what it would be like when they're dead. People looking at them in their casket, what would they say? And one of the friends said, I hope people will look at me and say, this man lived by principle. He never forgot what was important to him, what was valuable, and we honor that. The second man said, I hope people will remember me as someone who was able to love my family, and love people and show my love in the way way I took care of the people around me. And Nasruddin said, I hope people will look at me in this casket and say, look, he's moving. So this, I think, pretty much summarizes what I'm trying to say to you tonight. Life, this fullness of life, it's what's important. That's what the soul is. Being alive, being passionate. And all these virtuous ideas that we get from a kind of strange kind of religiosity about being virtuous and doing the right things and all of that are not nearly as important as moving. Being alive, being a person. And you know, the teaching is that the soul makes you move, keeps you alive, makes you breathe, makes you who you are. Aristotle, when it was asked what the soul is, he said, what makes an axe is the soul. What makes the axe an axe is the soul. And by extension, what makes you, you, is your soul. Okay, can we have some time to talk about these things for a while, do this in a platonic way? We're talking about the soul here tonight, and we're doing it among general friendship, and we're doing it with soul, enjoying each other's uniqueness, and there are no weird questions. Well, they might be weird, but they're still acceptable. So, any comments or questions here? Yes, sir.
I guess this is going back to the beginning of the lecture, but you talked about the modernist myth, or the myth of modernism, and you related that to how it kind of causes a lot of the craziness of
That's right.
everyday life. But is that really a purely modern, in terms of a contemporary facet of life? Is it?
Do you mean like, did they not have these things happening in other cultures that were not so modern?
Or did they not? I mean, and the other part of that is, was there a time when, you know, the soul, as you seem to put it, like the whole human, whatever, was incorporated into society in a way that was done?
Well, the way it's been done, the way people have tried to establish a soul-centered community in the past, as far as I know, two ways that are very related to each other. One is to form spiritual or religious communities. So, let's say in the history of the West alone, but it's also true in other parts of the world, people have tried to create a community where this acting out would not take place. And they formed religious communities which were quite successful, you know. They were really quite successful. And it's very interesting to me that these religious communities were not just spiritual, intellectual groups. They didn't just come to meditate all day long. You know, if you look at in history, at some of the monasteries in Europe, they were mainly known for the wine they made, the great bread they baked, the food they grew. I mean, these were spiritual communities, but and the utopian communities in a way. They tried to live a soulful life, but the thing is, it was life. That's why I wanted to end with the story of Nasruddin, the one about this story, because that's what really ultimately it's about. The soul keeps you alive and keeps you moving. The monks did that in their monasteries, and many different groups tried to create, I guess you could call them secular utopian communities. America was full of utopian communities. You know, the history of America is just full of it. Right around here, this part of Vermont, there were utopian communities. Throughout New England, over to Ohio, even down to Dallas. I mean, I lived in Dallas for a while, I studied this. A group of French idealists came over from France and founded Dallas, essentially. Founded Dallas. They were called La Réunion. They founded Dallas as utopians to create a very soulful organization around that place. Unfortunately, They thought that the Trinity River, which is where they decided to build their utopian community, they thought it was there all year long. It's not. It's there about 2 weeks out of the year. They were there during those 2 weeks, and they discovered they had no water. They thought they'd ship their goods down the water, down to the Gulf, and there was no such thing. So utopian communities lasted usually around 30 or 40 years in America. The Oneida community was a very interesting group. They were a Christian utopian community, both based around a leader, John Humphrey Noyes, who said that the gospel says that there should be no marriage in heaven, so people should not get married to each other, so their community was married all in one marriage. They call it a complex marriage, and believe me, it was complex. In other words, they had sex with each other, 400 people, and they had to get permission from the founder every time they wanted to sleep with someone. Very interesting community. I suggest that you study it. But my point is that yes, we've had violence all this time. We've had a lot of unconsciousness. We have not had a terrible amount of awareness and consciousness about how we work psychologically. This was really only developing as psychology, over the past 200 years, really. There was some kind of, before a little bit, but not much. So we've had a lot of acting out before that was not due to a modernist myth. I'm saying that our modernism is what has killed us. And our religion has turned into moralism pretty much. And so it doesn't provide that opportunity for the soul to experiment with its capacity for living together. I think we can. Now, though, I don't think this is a time necessarily for a utopian community. I think now is a time for us to see if we can't affect the culture around us, unless you want to make your own, make Marlborough College a kind of utopia. And the way some of you talk about it, I get that feeling that's part of fantasy here, which is great. Is it true? There's kind of utopian fantasy here? I mean that in a very good, solid way, meaning the sense that maybe here we could create a new kind of life, a different way of doing things, a community that's manageable.
Yeah.
That's what I pick up here in the conversations. And I think that's a wonderful thing, as a seed idea. I don't know if we can carry on having actual utopian communities ever. They tend to turn into new age groups that get self-focused so they don't work too well. But we certainly can change this culture around us. We've made a great step, it seems to me, in our recent elections, and we can move ahead but not leave it to leaders. However, whatever you think of your leaders, not leave it to them, but realize that community really is a group of leaders. And we bestow leadership on someone else only because we also lead our own lives, as we say. We lead our lives. So I would hope that here in your studies that you could maintain and continue this spirit of utopia, which is a way of pulling away from the modernist mythology, isn't it? It's saying we are a community that's different. We can do this. We can do things that other communities can't. I think that's a very good motivation to have. And that's all you need. You don't have to make an actual utopia here. You just create the spirit of it and let it generate something. I can talk about this because, my namesake, Thomas More, wrote a book called Utopia many years ago. He and I share a few things. I share some of his creativity. Yes?
You had mentioned earlier that you translated Logos as mystery.
Yes.
And we do a lot of writing here at Marlborough.
Yeah.
And Logos is often thought of also as word.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, in this liberating liberal education that's soulful, what would you expect of writing?
Writing?
Yeah.
Oh boy, I talk about writing for a long time. Well, a number of things. For one thing, you can write all kinds of things. Let me give you an example. I get the Writer's Digest magazine. If you didn't know that magazine, it's for writers. The last issue, they had a short story that won an award. a very short story. And I read the story and I thought, I almost felt like writing, maybe I still will write to them to complain, because it was one of these typical stories that, it's one of these dumb stories that has kind of a twist at the end. It's supposed to surprise you, like that's what you're reading for, to be surprised at the end. That's kindergarten stuff, it seems to me. You write a story just so you get a surprise at the end. Is that what you read for? I don't think so. And not only that, but it was, some kid bashed in the head of another kid, just for fun, sort of, at the end. And I thought, is this really what you want to give an award to? A story that's just about one kid bashing the head of another? I see the place for violence in stories. James Dickey's Deliverance is very violent, but boy, it really tells you a lot about